Hello, everyone. Welcome. We'll give folks a few more moments to join. If you want to introduce yourself in the chat, feel free to do so. We have folks muted and cameras off because of the presentation being recorded, but we'll give space for folks to ask questions after we're done recording. And also, if people want to interact in the chat, that's an option as well. We're really glad to have you all here today. Give it just one more moment and then we can jump in. Awesome, welcome. Awesome, lots of KV CAP folks, very cool. This will definitely apply to everything you do. Okay, looks like we have, I think most people on. A few people are still connecting to audio, so we'll give it just another moment. But for folks who have just joined, if you want to introduce yourself into the chat, feel free to do so. We have cameras and videos off because it is recording, but you can feel free to participate in chat. And it's being put on YouTube, I should say, not just being recorded, but being put on YouTube. That's part of it. But we'd love to find out who's here. So if you want to put that in chat, that is great. Awesome. And so I think I'll start sharing my screen and get us started. Well, first of all, thank you all so much for being here today. We're always so grateful to have this time and space with Redington-Fairview and all of you to talk about what's going on or to talk about these big issues around domestic violence. Today, we're going to talk about secondary trauma and self-care, which might feel like it's not directly domestic violence, but it is at the same time, because we know, when you are working at whatever you do, whether it's with KV CAP, with Redington-Fairview, you are working with survivors. If you're a paramedic, you're going to calls where survivors have experienced violence or other things going on. We know that a lot of the folks that we work with have experienced abuse, either in the past or present. So we know that we are all working with survivors, whether we know it or not, we are. Secondary trauma affects us. We'd like to think that we come in, what happens at work stays at work, or what happens at home stays at home. Like, I don't know, we like to think that we are these people who can do it all, but you know what? We are not robots. We are humans with feelings, and the people around us affect us. What we're experiencing affects us and affects others. We're all very connected. So being aware of secondary trauma and how it's affecting us and affecting our work and affecting the people we work with, and how it affects our lives is really important, especially when we are on the front lines doing this work, where we're seeing a lot of folks who are experiencing lots of things, not just domestic abuse. There may be other things going on in people's lives, and seeing that over and over, it weighs on us, and for us to pretend it doesn't do us any services, or anyone else any services. And burnout is real, and we really need all of us. So how do we take care of ourselves? How do we take care of each other to continue doing this work for a long time? Because we all need to be part of it. And what we do at work affects us in our home lives and vice versa. And so just being there, and also when we're working with survivors, if we're affected by this stuff, they're aware of it too. So knowing how we are and how we're affected, We want to be able to do this work and support survivors where they are. But if they're feeling like, oh, I can't say this to this person because it's having this impact, whatever that may be, people who are experiencing abuse are very vigilant. They have that hypervigilance where they're aware of what's going on, even if we may not be aware of our emotions. So we really want to do the best we can to take care of ourselves so that we can continue taking care of people and that they can, be able to ask for what they need. And if people have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat as we go, and Brittany will read those out loud. So what is secondary trauma? People may be not familiar with this term. It may be a newer term, but it's, the ways that we change over time because of our engagement with folks, because of what they've shared with us, because of seeing things over and over. I think of this a lot with first responders. When they go to a scene of an accident or a scene where, someone has experienced abuse, seeing, those intimate details of harm or of, times when people have been hurt, that, that weighs on us. And so doing it every day, we see that even doing it once, that affects you, but especially that compounding effect of doing it every day or hearing these stories every day. It sinks in. We do our best, like I said, to put that shield on every day, but these things sink in. So hearing stories, witnessing people's experiences of harm, loss, trauma, the things that they've gone through, maybe not even just with their partner, or not even that car accident or whatever it may be, but just also the bigger things too that go with that. When people are experiencing abuse, they may also be experiencing, they may be unhoused, they may not have insurance or resources that they need, and that all compounds and affects us too, because we may feel helpless, we may feel all kinds of things, and we want to be able to do more, but the systems have a role in this as well, which we'll talk about. And it can affect the way we see the world. Like, so what is safety? What has safety meant to us, so far? And then all of a sudden, maybe we hear a story or meet someone who, maybe lives a very similar life to ours, and their experience jolts us of like, oh, like this, this may be something that I also need to be scared of. And so knowing, that secondary trauma can affect us in these ways also, and how to go through the world with that too. Because some of the stuff, this affects us, I guess is what I'm going to say multiple times today. And so how do we deal with that? How do we cope? How do we support each other? How do our workplaces support us in dealing with all of this? Because it is a lot. It looks like we have a lot of folks from Redington-Fairview, a lot of folks from KV-CAP. So, when we're working with patients, when we're working with folks, hearing their stories, it affects us. So one of the resources that I'm going to reference a lot is the book Trauma Stewardship by Laura Vandernew Lipsky. It is a really beautiful book. And I think Connie, there's someone else, it's referenced in the reference section. It is a really beautiful book. I've read pieces of it. I need to sit down and read the whole thing at some point, because they do a really good job of talking about the impacts of this caring work. We're doing this caring work, and because we're caring individuals, but it does play a toll on us too. And so this is their example of what this can look like for folks, the trauma exposure response, what it looks like when people are working with folks, on the front lines, and how it's affecting them. And so there may be lots of things on here that you're like reading and you're like, oh, yep, I've, some of those things are feeling familiar, because as we're exposed to these things day in and day out, there may be things that we put up to protect ourselves. Some of these things may be protective, like dissociation. That's a protective thing that happens sometimes, right? Like, I just need to check out and be someplace else right now. It's hard because that may take care of ourselves in that moment. It's not serving the person in front of us, and it doesn't help us in the long term as far as like being able to deal with things, but in that moment it's protective. The anger and cynicism that can come up sometimes, I think, after seeing systems not function, or feeling kind of helpless in the work, you may feel cynical sometimes of like, oh, there's just nothing, or sometimes we blame the people in front of us of like, oh, I think there are things that we do to cope that may not be good for us or the people that we're working with. So being able to acknowledge like these are things that we did, we need to distance ourselves, so we create this wall, but that doesn't always help us or the people we're working with. Sometimes that grandiosity of like, I need, I'm really stressed and tired, but I need to go to work because if I don't do this, who's going to do it? It needs to be me. And like, the reality is people, there are other people doing this work, and we need to remember that. And we may feel like the sense of like, well, I need to be the one doing this, but if you need a break, it's important to take that break. We talk about that on the helpline a lot, as people are surviving without us. We as much as I say we need all of us, people are also very, strong and resilient. And, if we need to do something to take care of ourselves, or if we maybe worry, oh, I should have said this resource too, like, people, if we can make people feel valued and seen in this moment, like it's okay if we weren't there or didn't give that exact resource. But sorry, that was a bit of a tangent, but just feeling like that I need to be here and no one else can do this, when the truth is like we all need to take care of ourselves so we can do this for a long time. And if that involves stepping back, people, we also have to trust that people will get what they need without us too sometimes. Okay. So what else affects this? Like when I think of secondary trauma, it's not just hearing people's stories day in and day out, or seeing people at the, those really tough moments, being in the hospital, I can imagine in the ER especially, or even in the doctor's office, like people are disclosing a lot. People, they may be having the worst day of their life because of a diagnosis or because of, an accident or abuse. And so seeing that, but also then the compounding effect of like, what are the insurance loopholes that they're having to jump through, or, what are those other lack of resources, things that really compound to it. So if someone's unhoused, they're already so vulnerable, and may, go and stay with an ex who maybe was abusive, because they may not have another option. And at least them, they know what they're getting, versus being unhoused, where there are all kinds of other risks and dangers associated with that. So, having that lack of resources, lack of ability to refer people to, think that's the dream, right? Someone has a problem, we have a place for them to go, when the reality is we don't always have that. So that helpless feeling that comes with this, the lack of support, if like the people who are, in management, or other people we're working with, are indifferent, or, or burnt out themselves. Because I don't think people go into this work being indifferent. People come in because they're caring, but over time may feel like, I don't know what to do, And so when people aren't feeling supported, when you're coming up against people with a lot of hardship, and then you don't have support on the back end, that really affects this also, that feeling of helplessness and not having options. A personal experience of trauma, when someone's storyline is like parallel to yours, or someone in your life, a family member, a friend, that can bring things up for you, right? And that can, it's, even if you've done all the work, I think that's the part that, people may be like, I have done all the things, I feel good in this world, and yet someone was sharing something, and it was like a ton of bricks. And so being able to acknowledge that and say, it's not, there's nothing wrong with you, this happens. We don't get to control what happens to us, or what reactions our body feels, or our heart feels, or our mind. There may be things that that may be content, that may be reminders for traumas that we've had in the past. And so being able to create space to really deal with that, and, hopefully having other people in your work that can help step in too. Feeling conflict in work with ethics, like if you're feeling like this policy does not line up with, what we're trying to do here, or this policy is keeping people from getting services, or, things like that. If there's a conflict, that really makes it hard to do what you need to do. Again, I think it just goes back to that helpless feeling, of, we're supposed to be doing this thing, but this isn't allowing me to do it. And yeah, that can make it just complicates things, right? Having a lack of experience, and that's not, I feel like that sounds like a harsh thing, but just like if you've not been exposed to something, if you're feeling unprepared because you don't know what to do in this situation, or you don't know, how to support someone who's going through this. This is why we're like, let's talk about domestic violence. So, if someone discloses, you know what to say, you feel confident in your ability to talk about this and support them. Because when you're not feeling prepared, it leaves you feeling flustered, not confident. You feel like a lot, there's a lot of guilt that can happen, or a lot of like, oh, I didn't know what to do. And that can compound this feeling as well. Then exposure, if you're getting these calls every day, if you're on that front line where every day you're working with tons of people who are experiencing a multitude of things and hardships, that exposure over and over and over, like being able to build in time and space to have a moment is really important. And then interactions, thinking about the amount of time that you spend with people, as well as like the amount of time you spend with people in this moment, but then also the fact that you don't know how the story turns out. I think that's another piece that can be really hard, of like, you have this very intense interaction with someone and then they're gone. And so not knowing what happens. And so maybe building a practice around that to help you, because that it can be really challenging. I do a time check here. Okay. Let's go so quickly. Let's see. So this is, I'm not going to go through all of these. This is a slide from Futures Without Violence. And I have a link in the sources about a whole, you could do an hour and a half webinar where you listen to them talk about the subject. But these are some impacts that they talked about. I think of, when we think about secondary traumatic stress, we also think about burnout, compassion fatigue. They're all like sort of, different pages of the same book. But when we're noticing how work is affecting us, these may be some of the things. Like, I notice it when I'm dreaming about work. I'll wake up about work and be like, I was not thinking about work before bed. Why am I waking up thinking about work and these things? And just noticing, okay, like, what is it that I need to do, or what's going on that's making this happen? Or, thinking about like, how do I still take care of myself and work? Because I think part of that grandiosity of like, I can't even take a lunch break because I need to help my clients, when, you know what? I bet the president takes a lunch break. Like, the president probably eats lunch. And so are you more important than the president? Like, I don't know. Like, that's, a therapist has said that to me before. So I thought it was a very helpful nugget, and being vulnerable here with that, like passing that along, because what are the things that we're doing that we should be doing to take care of ourselves, and that will take care of ourselves and help us to be able to do this work that we may think we can't, but yeah, it's complicated, right? Like, so thinking about like, what is it that we need to do to take care of ourselves? It's the chicken and the egg. We're seeing this list, but these may be things that you're noticing, and it's a clue to like, okay, what's happening in my work life that I need to change. And then there are professional impacts as well. We always talk to workplaces about like, this is why you should also care about this, because you want your employees to feel good, and it affects them in these other ways too. So yeah, so you may be seeing these things. I think of this when, when you're wanting every day to be mental health day, that's a clue of like, okay, what's going on here? What are the bigger things that are happening that are making you really not want to go to work today? And what things can you control? What things are you not in control of? What needs to happen? So then the next step, how do we build resilience around this? What are the things that we can do in the workplace? And we'll talk about at home also. What are the things that we can do to help protect us and take care of us? And I didn't realize it's animated. So taking breaks, like, this is such a huge thing. And this is something that I hope your workplace supports, being able to take breaks, vacation days, sick time, having the time to take care of yourself, because this is hard work. So being able to take a break, maybe there are scheduled breaks, but maybe there's also a way if you have heard a story. I was just talking to my coworker about this morning. I asked her permission to use this example. She had just heard something really hard from someone. And so she walked away from her desk. She took her shoes off. She was walking around the office, grounding herself, literally grounding with her feet on the floor, her bare feet on the floor. She said sometimes she lays down on the floor fully as like a grounding thing. And, I feel like we're lucky that our workplace, we can be a little, quote unquote weird, but if that's what she needs to do to take care of herself after hearing this heavy thing, also people to process that with, of like, hey, and this is where like asking permission can be good, like checking in before disclosing if you need to, like, someone just told me this and I just need to say it out loud to someone else because it was really heavy to hear. Are you in a place to hear that right now? Or, this is something that's going on. Are you in a place? And just asking that permission too, because we don't know what the person in front of us is going through either. Even if they're a coworker, our manager, being able to ask that permission too, to, you know, put that out there. We need to take care of each other too, but just the things that we do for grounding. So being able to step away for a moment if you're feeling like, this is where, especially with the personal trauma or personal experiences, if something has brought that up for you to be able to do what you need to do to take care of yourself, that's so important, for everyone. If we hear hard stuff, and so whoever you are, whatever your experience, being able to take care of yourself is really important. So supportive staff who knows, the things that you need to take care of yourself and supports that. Having connection to other employees, like things sometimes, especially like we are in rural areas, we may have offices all over, and that can feel really isolating. So times to come together, to talk about the things that we're all experiencing, the trends we're seeing, because that can be, part of what we do too, of like, how do we, we're seeing this happen. How do we be proactive about supporting people who, like, for example, right now, who are unhoused? We're, our housing situation is having a major ripple effect, and it affects mental health, it affects all these things. So being able to come together to get support from each other and also being proactive can, that can help build resilience also. Employee assistance program, I encourage you to contact your HR to see what they have for employee assistance. Sometimes they have therapists that you can see. Maybe you get 3 visits with a therapist. That's not through insurance, it's just that. Or they may have other things. So being able to know what your employee assistance program is. I think HR should send this out periodically so people know without having to ask and feel like, because it is scary to ask. So it's good to know what you have. Training, being able to attend different trainings to help you, feel equipped and understand the ins and outs of different situations. I wish I had had domestic violence training when I worked at the homeless shelter. When I did homeless services work in Oregon, I felt totally unprepared to work with folks with DV. I didn't understand it. And I probably was not great, which, that doesn't feel good when you're like, I don't know what to do. I'm doing the best I can, but it doesn't feel right. Like, so having those training opportunities is really huge. Being able to feel good in the work you're doing is so important, and find meaning in your work. This is where some reflective time can be good, thinking about why you are there. What are the things that brought you there? Maybe thinking of times when, someone has told you, like, you made this difference for me. Maybe writing it down, having it on a post-it, like maybe like under your laptop, that every now and then you might need to like lift your computer up and see that, or look, flip to the back of your planner and see that, just, to ground you in the work that you're doing. And self-care, this is continued partly to work, but partly at home, like having an accountability buddy. This could be someone at work that you're like, hey, we're going to take a break today, right? We're going to lunch right now, or, however that works. But it could be someone from, your personal life that you just check in with. Because the thing about self-care, sometimes we just want to lay on the couch and scroll, right? Like we just want to be on Instagram because it's entertaining. But like, is that what we need? Like, do we want to be doing something else that makes us feel good? Because that might just make an hour go by where we don't feel anything, which is something, right? Like that like totally that happens sometimes, right? But like, is there something, so maybe I do that for a half an hour, I set a timer, and then like go have some space outside or go do something else. Also that will help me in different ways. Having reflection. So what am I struggling with most? Is there something coming up over and over? Am I having a reaction to a certain thing or a certain experience? Like why is that affecting me in this way? So being able to, reflect and then make a plan around it too. Like, do I need training in this area? What do I need for support? What do I need to cope with this thing that is bringing up so much for me? Like sometimes, yeah, there are different things that we just might get fired up about. Like, I don't know, like if it may be a struggle when people don't have insurance, and like how do they not have insurance? There's main care, there's this, there's that. But like, what are the barriers? Maybe finding out more about like, so what gets in the way for folks not having insurance? Like this may be a hard thing because it makes a lot of things harder, and there are these programs, but what might get in the way for folks, and being able to understand those systems might help have compassion, because you're like, this is making me really angry. I don't know why. I want to serve the people in front of me, but for some reason, this gets in the way. So what do I need to do to figure out what the bigger picture is? Because I don't want to have this reaction. um Activism outside of work. This is where, like, those things that maybe you have learned about, like, oh, this is what's happening with main care and that's why this is happening, like doing activism, or whatever it may be, activism to create the change, be the change you want to see in the world, which can feel like a lot on top of the work we're doing sometimes. So do what makes sense for you, but sometimes that can be part of what makes you feel good about the work you're doing too. Like, I'm doing this, but I'm also doing this. But do what makes sense for you, because this is a lot already sometimes. Having a creative outlet, like I like this. I need to do a time check. There we go. Creativity, like I feel like we learned in school how to not be creative on some level, like how to be creative, which made it feel like, oh, I'm not creative enough. Know that you can be as creative as you want to be. I really appreciate Waterville Creates for like doing so many programs and helping me like to pull down that wall of like, you know what, when you're like painting or doing something, you're using a different part of your brain and you can't think of anything else. It's kind of amazing. So, maybe painting isn't your thing, but experimenting. If you wanted to try something, try it. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. See how you feel while you're doing it. It's not about the outcome, I promise. Um, you may think it is, but it's not. It's how you're feeling when you're doing it. Figure out what it is for you. What brings you joy? That what is it that like gets your spark going? Because having these things outside of work are so important. And then if you need a routine, like sometimes people at 5 o'clock, when I get out of work, I just need to go for a walk, or I just need to do this one thing, or I just need, my kids need to know I need 5 minutes when I walk through the door that no one talks to me, whatever it is that you need, and not in a mean way. Like, of course, if, there's medical emergency coming over, but just give me like 5 minutes to breathe alone, figuring out what it is that you need at the end of the day or in the middle of the day, or, that is so important. And social connection is such a big part of this. Having community, even if you're like, oh man, I'm so peopled out, like, how can you find some balance to still be able to have community? Because, maybe there's something in your work that you can do less peopling somehow so that you can have that social connection outside of work. Meditation isn't on this list, but like those mindfulness moments, or, meditation, it's not like for, I mean, some people use it in the moment but for the most part, it's like, I think sort of a front loading thing of like bringing yourself down to this level of calm where like when things do happen, it's a little easier to get back down there. And just having that mindfulness, being aware of your breathing, being aware of how you're feeling, because sometimes we may be like realizing, oh, my heart's elevated right now, I'm breathing a little fast, like what's happening in this moment. Like right now I'm like, oh, I have 3 minutes left, so that's happening, so I'm going to take a breath, and figuring out what that is. And meditation can be a part of that, which doesn't have to look the way we think it's going to look. You get to build your meditation practice. um I liked this picture of an eagle because sometimes it doesn't look how we think it should look. Sometimes it is begrudging, me going on a stupid little walk for my stupid health. Like, we may not want to do it, but we may know, like, sometimes this is the thing that's going to be good for me in this moment. And self-care can look a lot of different ways. It may be, setting boundaries, saying no, putting yourself first, like, and knowing that self-care is not selfish. Self-care is what we need to do this work. And being able to set boundaries is really huge in our personal lives and in our work life. So being able to ask for help is also huge and really hard to do. That it is like exactly time. So here, this will be sent to everyone too. Trauma Stewardship is the book, Connie Burke and Laura Vandernoot Lipsky. And this second one, it's a workbook. It's like 50 pages, but it looked like it had some really good things of breaking all of these things down. And then the last one is the whole, they have a whole hour and a half where they talk about all of this. So if that's something you're inclined to listen to. So we can stop recording. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. But thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you all so much. We need all of us to do this work. So take